you able to hear me? Can anyone answer over here? I've given access to a couple of people. You can also raise your hand.
Praveen, we can hear you.
Okay, I hope you are also able to see
Yes.
the screen as well. Just make it mute yourself. Whenever there'll be any kind of questions, you can unmute. But apart from that, we'll also be taking at the end, we'll also be taking a question and answers. So there we can also check it. Okay. Apart from that, you also have the access to Q&A. So you will be able to access this. Please allow me to class. Okay. What happened? I believe Venki, you are available in the class. I'm not sure what was the message was for, but let's get started now. As we are already 21:09, so let's get started and see what we have covered it as a part of yesterday's topic, like what we have covered in terms of the yesterday's session, and then what we'll be covering up as a part of today. So as we have gone through yesterday, we have started with our basics of the understanding of JavaScript and TypeScript. So there we have gone through to check like what is variables, what are different types of variables, how does it work in general, and what happened in terms of why do we not use var keywords, why do we use let, where do we use let, why do we use const, and where do we use const keyword. Okay, so at the end of the session, there was a question saying that I did not understand how it is basically changing the global behavior of a particular things when we define using a var keywords. That was by family, I believe. Okay, so let's understand it once again, and then I'll move to the next topic. So what happened over here is when you try to declare a variable using a var variable equals to some other values over here, right? So we have defined a variable. We have defined a variable which is having a global scope. This is having a global scope. Global scope means this variable you can utilize at any point of time. Okay. Now, whenever you try to declare a variable inside the curly braces, right? So general concept is in any of the programming languages, whenever you try to declare any kind of variable inside the block of code, right? That means inside a curly braces, that generally used to be considered as a local scope variable, like local scope variable. That means it allows us to define the similar kind of variable inside the global and inside the as a part of global variable and as a part of local variable as well. Okay, so generally when you define a variable which is also a global and a local variable, right? So local variable will not have any understanding, as we have seen over here. A local variable will not have any understanding in terms of that we have the same variable available at the global level as well. Okay, local variable will not have any kind of understanding that we have the same variable available at the global level as well, and this global will also not have any kind of understanding that we also have a local variable with the same name. Okay, now what happened in terms of var is, var says that you can declare the same variable multiple times. var says that you can declare the same variable multiple times, right? So when you say that you can declare the same variable multiple times, that means even when you try to declare it inside the if block, which is inside the curly braces, it is not a function that we have defined over here. If you define it inside a function, that will consider as a local variable in terms of var keyword. But here we can see that we have defined some kind of variable which it allows to define with a same variable multiple times, right? Generally, we consider whenever we define inside anything inside a curly braces as a local variable. Okay, so when you consider this as a local variable and this as a global variable, whenever you try to do any kind of calculation over here using the similar variable name, this will basically override this behavior. That means this will consider that we are trying to declare. That means only in the case of var keyword, this will consider that we are trying to declare the same variable multiple times having different values. We are trying to declare same variable multiple times having the different values. And as per the concept, we understood that whenever you try to declare a variable using a var keyword multiple times, whatever the variable that you declared as a last, whatever the value of the variable that you declare as a last will be considered as a value of the variable, right? So here what it consider is, this is one variable, this is another variable. So in terms of a var keyword, it considered that we have declared two variable with the same name having different values, and whatever the last that you have declared will be considered as the will be basically considered as the value of the variable. And that is what is happening over here. This overrides the global variable that we have declared over here, saying that the last variable that we have declared for the variable over here is a JavaScript. So I'll consider the variable value of the variable as JavaScript over here as well. Okay, does it answer your question, Freeman? F Modi, I believe.
Yes, Praveen.
Okay.
Hello,
Great.
am I audible?
Yes, you are. You are.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. Along with that, you can also, ask if you have any kind of questions. I'll take at the end, and also will give you the access to talk at the end of our session as well. That means in the last 30 minutes of our session. So let's talk about the next concept that we have as a part of JavaScript or TypeScript is known as a data type. Okay. So first thing that we have understood, the very basic things, that how do we declare a variable. Now we'll understand what is data types and what are different data types that we have in terms of JavaScript and TypeScript. So what is data type generally is? Can anyone answer over here? What is data type?
Basically, the input classification.
Yes. Any other?
The type of data which we are going to store into a variable.
Right. So the type of data that will be stored inside a variable is known as a data type. Whatever the type that we are trying to go to, whatever the type that we are going to store inside a variable is known as a, like whatever the data that we're trying to store inside a variable, and whatever the type of the data will be, that is known as a data type of a variable. Okay. So what is data type? Data type is basically it defines, or which defines what kind of data or variable consists of. What kind of data a variable is stored. A variable is stored. That means basically data type defines what kind of data a variable is storing. That means whenever you try to define a variable that we have defined over here, var I equals to 10. So what kind of data that we have defined inside a variable over, that is what known as a type of the data that we have defined inside a variable. Okay. In that case, there are different types that are available inside both JavaScript and TypeScript. Okay. So there are majorly, there used to be two types of data type in any of the program language. Two types of data type. Okay. Now what are those two types of data type is? One is known as primitive data type, and second is known as non-primitive data. One is known as a primitive data type, and second is known as a non-primitive data type. So what is primitive data type? Primitive data type is a type, or is basically a data type which stores a single value. Whenever you try to declare a variable which stores a single value, is considered as a primitive data type. Okay, only one value will be stored inside a primitive data type. Only one value will be stored inside a primitive data type. What is not understood? Non-primitive is something which will store a multiple data. multiple data can be stored inside a non-primitive data type. And what can be those things? There are again categorization for the primitive data type and multiple data type that we'll understand over here. So non-primitive data type, a variable which will store a single value for that whatever the type of the data will be, that is known as a data type, which is primitive data type. And for non-primitive data type, a variable which can store a multiple data, that is known as non-primitive data type. Multiple data can be of different types as well, right? That is why it is known as non-primitive. In case of a primitive, it will always be a single type of data type. In case of non-primitive, it will always be a single data type. I equals to 10, or I equals to Rahul, or I equals to true, right? Or I equals to some other things, right? That will always consist of a single value. Whereas when we talk about a multiple data that it can store can be some other things. What can be those things? That can be an array, that can be an object, that can be a function, and that can be other things as well in terms of non-primitive data. So generally non-primitive data type are array, objects, and functions. Non-primitive data type are array, objects, and functions which stores a multiple values. Array can store a multiple values, objects will store a multiple values, and functions will always have different types of things. Now talk about array. When we talk objects, so if you are from the Java background, you should be aware of that. Object is something we create to access the properties and method. We basically create an object. That is an object, right? But in terms of script, a different object. Whatever or whenever inside any of the let's say program or the code or any of the test cases, test automation, whenever you see inside a JavaScript and TypeScript that something have been declared inside a curly braces and having a key colon value pair, key colon value pair, something as a key and other is as a value over here, it's considered as an object in JavaScript. Okay, something which is available inside a curly braces having a key and a pair is known as an object in JavaScript and TypeScript. We'll discuss in of our like regarding array, object, and functions. Currently, let's see what are different types of non-script data we have. So as a part of primitive data type, we have something known as different types again. Right? So as part of primitive data type, which will store a single value. Again, if you are again from let's say Java background or a .NET background, then you might be knowing that we have something known as integer, floating point, double values, and so on. Right? So integer, floating point, double values are in Java and .NET are considered basically as a different types of data type. Okay, whereas in JavaScript and TypeScript, all type of variable, all type of values that you define as a part of numeric values, which can be a decimal, which can be a whatever we say as a floating point number is also decimal values, and an integer which is positive, negative, and any other part of the integer value will be considered as a single data type in JavaScript and TypeScript, and that is known as number as a data type. Number as a data type. So we have one data type is known as number. Second, we have string data type. Third, we have a Boolean as a data type. Third, we have Boolean as a data type. Fourth, we have one more data type that are available in JavaScript and TypeScript are known as null. Fifth is also known as an undefined. Yes, undefined is also one of our data type in both JavaScript and TypeScript. Sixth that we have in terms of TypeScript is known as any, and seventh also there are in terms of TypeScript is known as union. So whatever the value that you see from number 1 to number 5, are both common in JavaScript and TypeScript. Whatever the value that you see as a part of data type over here, which is starting from number 1 to number 5, are considered as a like data type available in both JavaScript and TypeScript. In both JavaScript and TypeScript, number, string, boolean, null, and undefined are available as a data type. Whereas in TypeScript, they have given couple of extra, which is known as any and union. Any and union are available only in only in TypeScript. Non-primitive data type are exactly same in both JavaScript and TypeScript, which is array, objects, and functions. Okay, so let's discuss one by one over here. First, we'll go through with the primitive data type, and we'll be starting with number 1 here. Now, when we talk about a number as a primitive data type, right? So number in JavaScript and TypeScript, both in JavaScript and TypeScript, number represents both integer and floating point value. Number over here represents both integer. What can be the integer value? Can be the integer value. Integer can be anything, any positive numbers. Right. Anything which is like positive number, negative number, and so on will be considered as an integer value, right? And a floating point. So both integer and floating point values will be considered as a, or floating point value will be considered as a number data type. So JavaScript and TypeScript both will not basically discriminate that this is a floating point, this is a double, or this is an integer. All the type of numerical value that you define, any type of numerical or all the type of numerical value that you define is considered as a number data type. Okay, all the type of value that you define is considered as a number data type. Okay, now how do you declare a variable that we see over here? We have also seen syntax at the time of going through with the syntax over here. That means we have to start a keyword, either var, let, or const, then define a variable name equals to value. This is in terms of JavaScript. How about in terms of TypeScript? We also have to define a data type, which is again an optional part, over here. So you can provide the data type. If you would like to provide the data type of the variable that you have defined, you can also provide the data type over here. Data type of a variable. Now, what is under that? So how do we define a variable? By using a keyword, any kind of keyword. It can be, which is var. We usually do not use let or const. And then you can define a variable name over here. Colon. How do you define the data type of a variable? Whenever you define, by using a colon and then type of the data, you can define it over, which is again completely optional. So we are using a TypeScript is optional, but TypeScript has given a flexibility that you can define a data type of variable as well, and then you can define the value of the variable. Value should be similar to the data type that you have defined over here. It is not something like, let's say, you say it as let I equals to let I colon this should accept a number, and then you are assigning some value which is now I believe like I have been, or let's say var 1. So you cannot do in this way, right? This will, in terms of a TypeScript, it will throw us an error. In terms of a TypeScript, it will throw us an error. In JavaScript, it does not require any kind of value over here, so you are free to utilize, or you can basically free to use any kind of value. Did we use anywhere inside the var? Yes, we have already used. So let's say data, some kind of So let data equals to some kind of value. This is basically a syntax for writing the or declaring a variable in JavaScript. We have not defined any. So whenever you do not define any kind of variable in JavaScript, that is free to. That means you can also assign any kind of value over here. Later you can change the value of a variable inside the JavaScript. Okay. Let's side by side also create a datatypes.js over here, so we'll understand. So in terms of this, if you see inside JavaScript, it is allowed, right? It will allow you that you do not have to define any kind of data type. If you try to define a data type over here, it will throw you an error saying that type annotation can only be used in TypeScript. Okay. Okay. So what ultimately happening over here is, in terms of a TypeScript, it is allowing us that you can define a variable of a specific type. Again, that is not mandatory. Now, you might be having a question that, okay, if it is not mandatory, then why it is throwing us an error? Right? Why it is throwing us an error? We have given a string value, we have assigned a numeric value, but why it is throwing us an error? Right? So it is because there is a concept known as, there are two different types of concept that we have in TypeScript. One is known as, we'll cover up, probably I'll cover up today itself, which is known as type annotation. And second is known as type inference. Okay. And second is known as basically type inference. So what is type inference and type annotation I'll talk about. But generally what happens is, even though you have not defined any kind of data type over here, TypeScript will generally identify depending on the value that you have defined over here. TypeScript generally will identify depending on the value that you have defined over here for a variable. So you can hover over on this and it says that this is the type that you have defined is a string. Okay, so what it will consider is, whatever the first value that you have defined will consider the data type of a variable. Again, if you change it, it depends on the value that you are trying to store. It will automatically consider the data type of that variable. So if you now see, it is saying that it is a number data type. Okay, probably data we have defined somewhere, so I'll just say it as data1. Okay, so that says that it depends on the value that you are trying to define for a variable. It will automatically set the data of a variable.
So Praveen, why is it throwing an error when you are typing a data instead of data1?
Data, I believe we might have stored somewhere already.
Okay.
So okay, so we have defined it inside a JavaScript, and that is why it is saying that you have already defined the data in terms of data types inside the TypeScript. So now why it is defining, why it is saying when we define a data over here, that means it says that cannot redeclare block scope data, right? That means whenever you try to declare a variable using a let keyword, that will not allow you to redeclare the same variable, right? So ultimately what happened is, as we understood earlier, ultimately what happened is the TypeScript will be converted to a JavaScript file, right? The TypeScript will be converted to a JavaScript file, and then that JavaScript file will run over there. So what this file is considered is as, this file basically considered as a compiled file of the TypeScript. Datatype.js that we have created is being considered as a compiled file of TypeScript, and that is why it is saying you have already defined a variable. You have already defined a variable which is data, and this will not allow you to redeclare the same variable. Okay. Now you see over here what we have done is, in this case you can try to declare any kind of numeric value, and that will be considered as a data type of the variable, which is number. So number data type will accept both integer and floating point values as well in JavaScript and TypeScript. Okay. Now I was talking about type inference, right? So type inference is a can you mute yourself? Whoever is not trying to speak, can you please mute yourself? Thanks. So type inference is a concept. Type annotation is a concept that whenever you mention a data type specifically, right? I have also given inside the TypeScript tutorial document that you can also watch it through or check it out. But type inference is something that it says that whenever you try to declare a variable, and for that variable, if you are trying to specifically mentioning the data type as well, that is known as type annotation. Means whenever you try to declare a variable, and for that variable, if you are trying to declare the explicitly, you are trying to mention the data type as well, like this kind of things, which is colon number, is known as a type annotation. Is known as a type annotation, which says that we have specifically or explicitly mentioned the data type of the variable, variable that we have defined over here. Okay, that means we are saying that the variable that we have defined will accept a number as a data type. If you hover over on this, you can see that it is also defining what kind of data type that you have stored over here. Okay. Now, what is the concept of type inference? Type inference says that it will implicitly define the data type of the variable that you have defined over here, depending on the value that you have declared for the data type. So now, in this case, if you try to again hover over on the data 3 over here, you will say that it is saying a number, right? Again, if you let's say if you combine it inside, if you make it inside the double quotation, and you again hover over on this, it will automatically say that this is a type of string over here. Okay, so here in this case, what is happening is we have not mentioned what kind of data type that we have defined over here, but it is automatically considering the data type depending on the value that we have defined over here, is known as a type inference. So type annotation, you are specifically mentioning or explicitly mentioning that the data type that you are trying to define for a variable. Type inference, without mentioning any data type, it will automatically consider depending on the value that you have defined over. This will be one of a question for freshers. What is a difference between type annotation and type inference? So these are technical terms. There is nothing other terms that we have. They will definitely ask you a technical terms. Okay, so most of the time I'll try to talk in a technical term itself, because sometimes what happens is I'll talk about my study itself. I know the complete concept of both JavaScript and TypeScript. I'm not a master, but I still know much better things, right? I was having the complete understanding of functions. How do we define a function in JavaScript and TypeScript? You know, in the initial days when I was learning JavaScript and TypeScript, I went for an interview and they asked me a question. What is function declaration? What is difference between function declaration and function expression? What is difference between function declaration and function expression? Those both are the technical term for how do we define a function. I was stuck over there itself. I was knowing that how do we declare a function in both ways, function declaration and function expression. But due to the lack of knowledge of the technical terminology, I got stuck over there itself, and that was a very basic question. Okay, so that is why wherever and whenever it comes, I'll try to mention the technical terminologies over here, and you also have to follow those things. Okay, just follow whatever I'm saying. That will be helpful for the interview, because as I said earlier, I have also taken more than 500 interviews till date. Okay, so type annotation, there will be definitely a question for the freshers. What is difference between type annotations and type inference? So whenever there will be a question like this, you can simply say it as type annotation. Whenever you try to declare a variable by explicitly mentioning the data type of the variable, is known as type annotation. And whenever you try to declare a variable which it automatically consider the data type of the variable depending on the values is known as, or implicitly consider the data type of the variable depending on the value that you have declared for the variable is known as type inference. Okay, so this is what the number data type we have, which will consist of both integer and floating point number. That means decimal values. Any type of numeric value that you define will come under a data type as number data type. Okay. Now, second, we have data type as string. Now, everyone might be aware of what is string or what is a value. Basically, text value or a combination of or a sequence of character is known as sequence of character or combination of character is known as a string, right? Combination of character. Combination of character is known as string. Characters is known as a string. Example, something which is, let's say, hello. Say it as hello. Hello is a combination of character. H is one character, E is one character, LL is another character, O is another character, right? So this is what the combination of or a sequence of character is known as a string. Now, a string is a data type as well in both JavaScript and TypeScript. But how do we define a string in JavaScript and TypeScript is a bit different than we have in Java. Okay, so let's try to again understand how do we define the what are the different ways in which we can define the string in both JavaScript and TypeScript. Okay, so there are different ways in which we can define a string in both JavaScript and TypeScript. First way is by using a single quote. It is also known as string literal. So by using a single quote, you can define the string inside the JavaScript and TypeScript. When you try to define using basically a single quote in Java, that is considered as a char. That is having a data type as a char, right? In JavaScript and TypeScript, there is nothing called char as a data type. Everything will be considered as a string itself. Either you define a single character inside a single quote, that will also be defined as a, that will also be considered as a string data type itself. Now, what is the proof of that? I'll show you in the next couple of minutes. So one way of defining a data type in terms of a TypeScript is by using a single. What is single quote? What is the symbol of that? This is a single, which is also known as string literal. What is string literal? Whenever you try to declare a variable directly by defining a single quote or double quote is known as string literal. This is also a literal. This is basically also a literal, number literal. That means you have defined a data, defined a variable directly by using a value. Okay. Second way of defining the string in Java, both JavaScript and TypeScript, is by using a double quote. That is also known as string literal, where we'll directly define the value like this. Okay. And third way of defining the string in both JavaScript and TypeScript is by using a backtick symbol. Backtick symbol is the symbol as this one. Okay, that is known as template literal. That is known as template literal. Template literal. Most of the time we'll be using a string literal by either by directly defining a single quote or double quote. But there is a specific use of this template literal by using a backtick symbol. Now, where you will get the backtick symbol on your keyboard is you will get just about to the tab keyword on your keyboard, or just below to the escape keyword on your keyboard will be a backtick symbol. Okay. Now, this is known as a template literal. So this, it is not like, this is a way where you can define a string, but this is not a best practice that you have to define a string using a backtick. Backtick we only have to use for the template literal kind of things. Now, what is template literal? Template literal means when we try to use a string variable. Any question over here? Can you please mute yourself? Anyone is unmuted, please mute yourself. Thanks. Okay, so just coming back to you people, like, are you people following the session? How is it? Like, is it very hard to understand, or how is it like going in a bit faster way, or how is it the things? Anyone can answer over here.
So Praveen, I mean, this is a one humble request. If you can go with the slower pace, at least for this, TypeScript sessions. So,
Okay.
I'm not from the coding background, so that will be,
Definitely,
hard.
definitely.
Yeah. So that will be, yeah.
Definitely, sure. Okay, so definitely, I'll let me go in a bit slower manner over here. Okay. So I'll just get the question over here. Why we have type annotation separately in TypeScript, as it is not mandatory to define data type in TypeScript as like in JavaScript. So in JavaScript, it is not mandatory. JavaScript does not allow to write you any kind of type annotation. Type annotation will be allowed in TypeScript itself. Okay, type annotation will be allowed in TypeScript itself. JavaScript will not allow those kind of things. But when you are saying like why we have type annotation separately in TypeScript, as it is not mandatory to define the data type, that is what known as TypeScript as a type safe. This is why the TypeScript known as a type safe. That means you can specifically define a variable. You can specifically define a variable using the data type as well. So this is allowed. Like this is basically an optional, but TypeScript provides us an option that you can try to define a specific type of data type or specific type of variable as well. And that is why it has been.
Yeah, Praveen, my question was, see, when it identify itself, I mean, what is the data type that is being provided by automatically by itself? Why do we have to specifically give the data type is what I meant to ask.
Right. So why it has given is there are two things happen. When you do not define any value, when you do not define any data type, that is considered as a JavaScript code. That will be considered as a JavaScript code where we do not define any kind of data type. And here also it will be able to understand depending on the value that you have defined over here. Okay. Now, in terms of a TypeScript says that basically it is a statically typed language. Statically typed language means it will throw us an error at the time of writing the code itself. So to restrict a variable to store any kind of data type going forward, to restrict a variable to store any different data types of variable, it allowed us to define certain data type in an explicit way, certain data type for a variable in an explicit way, that you can define a number so that if anyone sees any kind of values over here, that they will all automatically know that, okay, you have defined a data type over here. You have defined certain type of data type over here. But this will be useful at the time of going through with a function. This will be this basically useful at the time of going through with a function. So I'll just try to make you understand that you can define a and b over here, right? You can define a and b over here. Now, what if you do not define any type of data type? This will consider as a data type as any. This will automatically consider it as a data type of any. Now, if your specific thinks that it should only use a number value or it should only use a numeric value, and if you do not define a data type, this will consider as any. That means if anyone call this along with the string as well, this function will work. Okay. So to just restrict someone from using a specific things inside functions inside a variable, TypeScript has allowed us that you can also type a data type for the variable. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, okay.
Great. Now let's talk about a string. String is basically a combination of characters. String in both JavaScript and TypeScript we can define in a three different ways. One is by using a single quote. That means inside a single quote, whatever you try to define a value will be considered as a string in both JavaScript and TypeScript. Second is by using double quote. That means something that you again provide inside a double quote will be also considered as a string data type itself. And third is known as backtick way of declaration of a string. That means you can also define a string by using a backtick. This is not a best practice. Always try to define a string by either using a single quote or double quote. When do we use a backtick symbol? That means whenever we have to use a data-driven testing, or whenever we have to call any variable inside a string, whenever we have to call any variable inside another string, at that point of time, this template literal will be helpful. I'll give you the example for this template literal. But at the time of calling any certain variable inside a string, at the time of calling any particular variable inside a string will be helpful to do that by using backtick symbol. That means using a template literal. Also, whenever we go for a data-driven testing, at that time, that point of time, this backtick option will be much more helpful. We cannot use or we cannot do a parameterization of a test case by using a single quote or double quote. Parameterization means by using a data type, different types of data and data-driven testing. Okay, so you cannot call any other variable inside a string which you have defined using a single quote or double quote. To call any other variable inside a string, you always have to define by using a backtick symbol. Okay, so this basically what happens is like whenever we try to use a variable inside the string, at that point of time, this template literal will be helpful. So how do we call a variable inside another string inside a string by using like this dollar and then curly braces, and then we have to use the variable, whatever the variable that we define, we have to call it. This is how we basically call inside any of the this is how we basically call any of the variable that we declare inside another string. Okay, so I'll talk about this and then you'll understand. So first way of declaration is which is like simple. You can simply define, let's say, let single quote over here, and then you can define a variable. This is, let's say, example, this is a single quote string. Now you might say that, like, how do I know that this is really a string? How do I know that this is really a string? Because we have given inside a single quote, right? You can also mention it over here that this is a string data type specifically. Do not mention, then you might be having a question that how do I know that the single quote is having a string data type? Because we have declared inside a single quote, right? So there are two ways in which you can identify. There are two ways in which you can identify a data type of a variable. Okay, you can identify a data type of a variable. One, by using a type of operator. So what you can do is you can simply write a console.log and then use a type of. There is a type of operator available which says that type of this particular value. You can define a type of space and then the variable that you are trying to check what kind of data type that this variable consists of. Okay, so this is one way where you can use type of operator. This is not a method, this is an operator. by using a type of operator, type of this particular variable, you can simply say that it will simply say us that what is the data type of the variable that we have defined over here. So now if you try to run this by using tsx and then datatypes.tx, you'll see that it will return us a value which is string. That means it is saying that this particular variable that we have defined over here having a value inside a single quote is a string data type. Okay, this is one way. The simplest way to identify the data type of a variable that you have defined is you can hover over on the variable that you have defined. So this is a variable that you have defined over here. So you can just hover over on that and it will say you that the value that you have defined over here is a type as data type as string. Okay, the same thing you can also do over here. You have already mentioned number, so you should be knowing this. But if you hover over on this, this is saying a number. If you hover over on this, this is saying a string data type over here. Okay, so this is first way of defining a string in JavaScript by using a single quote inside a JavaScript and TypeScript. The second way is by using a double quote. Second way is by using a double quote. That means instead of single quote, you can simply use a double quote over here, and that will also be considered as a string in both JavaScript and TypeScript. Hover over on this, it is still saying that this is a string data type. Okay, so these are normal things we generally define in terms of the program, in any of the program, by using a double quote. JavaScript and TypeScript allows us to declare a string inside a single quote as well. Okay. Now, what is the third thing that we have? Third way of declaration of a string is by using a template literal. So you can define by using a template literal as well. You can simply say it as, let's say, template literal, and you can define by using a matrix. This is string, some values kind of. This is not a normal way of declaration of a string. This is not a good practice that you can define a string by using a backtick, right? So this, why it has been given then, what is the use of this things that it has given inside the JavaScript and TypeScript? There is a specific there is a basically specific need of this particular template literal. What is the use of that is, let's say, along with the example over here. So let's say I'm trying to declare a variable having some name. Let name equals to John. So we have defined name equals to John. Name was basically a keyword earlier, so that it used to throw us an error. So I'll just say it as name1 equals to John. So we have defined a variable. It can be anything. It is not needed that it should always be a string itself. Let's say you can just define a variable known as age and having a value as 30 over here. Okay. So let age equals to 30. This is the variable that we have defined over here. Now I'm trying to declare a variable. I'm trying to declare another variable saying that let greet, some kind of value variable name that I'm providing over here. And I'm saying over here that you are of age, and then trying to call this particular variable over here. Okay. So we have defined a variable which is again a string type. Either you can use a single quote or double quote is a type of string, right? And now you have to call this particular variable inside this at this point of time. How will you call this variable? The calling of a variable inside a string. Calling of another variable inside a string is by using like this, which is dollar symbol. And then inside the curly braces, you have to call the variable that you have defined earlier. Okay. So basically what you are trying to write is you are of age, whatever the age that you have defined over here. You are of age, whatever the age that you have defined over here. Okay. Now, in this case, if you see, whenever you try to, call any variable inside a string, that will not be allowed in terms of by using a single quote or double. Whenever you try to write this, which is you are calling a variable which is having a variable name as age, right? This will also be considered as a normal text value inside the double. Okay, now what I mean to say is, let's try to print this console.log over here. Generally, we are trying to call another variable that we have declared over here inside the string. So if you try to do that by using either a single quote or double quote, what is happening over here? Let's see what is the output that it is throwing us. The output is you are of age, whatever the things that we have defined over here, right? Again, if you try to change it to a single quote, at this point of time also it will throw us the similar kind of thing, which is you are of age, whatever the things that you have given over here. This is also considered as a normal string value itself. Now, if you do the similar kind of things by using, now in that case, like how do we use a data type? How do we use basically another variable inside a string? That is possible by using a backtick symbol. Whenever you define by using a backtick symbol, you can see that it is basically identifying that we have a variable with the name as age and the value that you have defined is as a number. Okay. Now again, if you try to execute this, this will say that you are of age 30. Again, if you change it to any other values, then it will define the some other values, whatever it has called over here. Okay. So whenever you try to parameterize the string, value, that means you are trying to call another variable inside the string. At that point of time, this template literal will be very helpful. At that point of time, this template literal will be very helpful, which we cannot achieve by using a single quote or double. And that is why the template literal have been introduced in JavaScript and TypeScript. Okay. I hope everyone is following the session over here. Any one or two questions?
Yes, Praveen.
Yes, great. Great. If you are still having any kind of doubt, please feel free to ask, because it is your right to ask the questions. It is not something that you have to be muted always, even though you have a doubt. Feel free to ask. I'll repeat n number of times. I can repeat that I'll repeat the same concept n number of times unless you understand the concept. Okay.
So Praveen, in a real world example,
for the template literal, yes.
so in real time scenario, what people generally follows? I mean, is it a single quoted string or a double quoted string?
There is no difference between single quote and double quote. Generally, I have seen most of the time people go for a single quote itself. But there are again the certain rules are available. So that we'll see like at the time of going through with the locators. But both are same. There is no difference that either you can use a single quote or double quote. I have seen most of the time I try to use a single quote. Other people try to use a double quote. And in the organization as well, most of the people will follow either a single quote or double quote itself. There'll be a combination of as well. So either you use a single quote or double quote, there'll not be any kind of difference. Now you might be having a question that if it is not having any kind of difference, then that why they have allowed over here, like single quote or double quote. Generally, people get confused saying that whenever you try to define anything inside a single quote, that is considered as a character data type. And that is why, to avoid that, JavaScript and TypeScript has introduced a single quote as well for part of string. Okay. Second thing is, at the time of writing the locators, right? at the time of writing the locators, there will be a situation when you have to write a locator. If you write something as an outer part, so let's say example, you have something which is text value equals to some other text value. Okay, do not worry, like if you're not understanding over here, we'll go through at the time of locators understanding. So what happens generally is, why they have given single and double quote both as well is, if you are defining a double quote over here as an inner part of the code, if you are trying to define a double quote, then you cannot use double quote over here as a part of auto quote, because what it will consider is, it started over here and ended over here, again started over here and ended over here, and in between the value that you have given will throw us an error saying that this is not any type of data type. So that is why they have allowed us to use a string by using both single quote and double quote. That means if you are writing double quote as an outer part, then you have to define an inner value as a inner string as a single. If you are trying to define a single quote as an outer value, outer string part, then you have to define an inner string as a basically double. Okay, that is why you might have seen generally when we try to write a locators using XPath, always internal value, internal locators that we write. If you have understanding of that, then internal locators we basically write using a single, because in Java we have only double quote as a part of string. Okay, so it allows us to declare an inner value as a single. One more concept why they have allowed us single quote and double quote both as a string over here in JavaScript and TypeScript. Okay, now now let's move to the next part. The third part that we have is a Boolean type, right? So Boolean data. A Boolean will be helpful for us at the time of checking some kind of condition, like when you are trying to compare some values, or when you are trying to check whether one number is equal to other or not, or one string is equal to other or not, right? So Boolean will try to give us help us at the time of checking the condition. Now again, Boolean will always consist of only true value, either true or false. When we say it will help us in checking the condition, right, that means, let's say in a real-time example, let's say you are going for some admission inside any of the institute, right? Let's say any of the colleges, and they have certain type of cutoff value, right? So depending on your marks that you have obtained in the examination, they'll either say yes or no to the no. That means they'll either allow you or they'll not allow you to get the admission inside the institute, right? Second example can be, let's say if you are if you have asked some kind of questions to a people, right, they'll either answer you or they'll not answer you. Like if you ask someone's a name, like directly you go and somewhere and ask someone some kind of name, like what is your name, they'll either give you an answer or they'll not give you an answer. If they give you an answer, that is a true value. If they will not give you an answer, that is a false value. That means yes and no. Yes considered as a true, no considered as a false. Okay, in numerical concept, the true will be equal to 1 and false will be equal to 0. Okay, so so when we talk about, also talk about like Boolean type, it will always consist of either a single value, like either a true or a false. Apart from true or false, they will not be having any kind of value for a Boolean. Okay. Example, it can be, what could be the example for this? So example, let's say let is admin. Is admin. So we can define it over here, a data type as well, and then you can say it as true. If a user is an admin, then you can define it as a true value. depending on the condition. If it is an admin, if a user is admin that you are trying to validate whether a user is admin or not, then it will throw us a true value. If it is not admin or a normal admin, then it will throw us a normal user, then it will throw us a false value. This is an example. Like again, another example, a real-time example can be when you try to check an element is available on the page or not. Right? That means you are trying to check a condition whether some element is available on the page or not inside any of the application. That will again give you yes or no. That means true or false. If the element is available on the page, that means true. If it is not available on the page, that means false. So Boolean will always be used for a condition kind of things where and whenever you think that it will either give you a true or false value. Example, 10 is greater than 5. We know that 10 is always greater than 5, so that will give us a true value. So if you try to print over here, which is, let's say, 10 is greater than 5. This is a condition. What we are trying to check is a condition, whether 10 is greater than 5 or not. So if it is greater than 5, then it will throw us a true value over here. Right? If it is not greater than, let's say, 50, we know that 10 is not greater than 50, then it will throw us a value as a false. Right? So Boolean will always throw us either a true or false value. Now the fourth one that we have is known as null data. So we also have a data type known as null in JavaScript and TypeScript. Now what is the use of null is? Null means no value. Okay. Generally, we will never be using null in terms of our test automation or in terms of even the programming. Okay, so null data type and the next undefined data type we probably might not be using in terms of the test automation, but we still have to understand. So null means no value. That means you can define a variable by using a null data. That means you are just saying it as you have defined a variable that is having no value, no type of value, or none. Like it has, we have defined a variable, but this variable is not having any kind of value. Okay, at that point of time, you can provide the null over here for a variable. And as we know that this is not a legitimate code, that means there will not be any kind of situation in terms of test automation or programming where we have to define a variable without having any value. That means equals to null value, right? There can be one situation when you have created an object and if you are trying to check whether the object is equals to null. That means if the object is not alive, that means it is not having any kind of value, you can create a null value. What I mean to say is, if let's say you are trying to check any kind of object equals to null. Okay. If it is null, then you can create an object again by using certain things. You can simply create an object. Let's say new and then object for a class. This is an example that I'm trying to give you. But generally, null will not be using in terms of the test automation as a B. Now, the fifth one that we have is known as undefined. Right? Undefined is also similar to a no value. That means there is a no value for any of the variable that we have defined. Then what is difference between null and undefined? Why there are two different types of data type that it has given in terms of both JavaScript and TypeScript? So undefined is no value. Null is also a no value. Null means specifically we are mentioning over here that this variable consists of a no value. Okay. Undefined means we have declared a variable, but we have not assigned any value to a variable. We have declared a variable, but we have not assigned any kind of value to a variable is known as an undefined. That means by default, when you try to declare a variable, declare a variable without having any kind of value, okay, without having any kind of value, the data type of this variable will always be considered as an undefined. Okay. So if you try to print the data 5 over here, you'll see that this will return us a value as undefined. That means we have not defined any value for this particular variable. And that thing in JavaScript and TypeScript, they have made it as a data type as well. Okay, so by default, when you try to declare a variable and you have not assigned any value to a variable, that will consider as a undefined. That means that particular variable will have an undefined as a data. Okay, that means this particular variable is not having any kind of data that you have assigned. So by default, when you try to declare a variable which you have not assigned any kind of value, will return us as an undefined as a value. That means you have not defined any value. No initialization have happened for this particular variable, or no assignment have happened for that particular variable. Whereas null means you have explicitly mentioned that this variable does not contain any kind of value. Okay, that is what the difference we have in terms of null and undefined. Now, sixth one that is specifically for TypeScript is known as any data. Sixth one is known as any data type. Any means any is basically a special type of data type. It is a special type of data type that we have in TypeScript. Here we have seen that, okay, when you try to declare a numeric variable, you cannot basically declare again the data for this one as a string, let's say PS. So it will throw us an error saying that type string is not assignable to a type because you have defined a variable which is out of type number. So it is warning us that you are trying to assign a value of a variable as string over here, okay, instead of number. Okay. So this will basically throw you an error at the time of writing the code itself. Okay. Now, what happened in terms of any? So whenever you try to define a variable, let's say data, and you are saying that any over here, any other data type, you can assign a value over here. So any means this variable can accept any type of data type, any value of type, any data of this variable can accept any value of different data types as well. So what is meant by that is, we have defined a variable which is having a data as any over here, which we have defined now as a numeric value. Now in the next line for this, you can also define a string value. In the next line, you can also define a boolean. You can also define a null. You can also define undefined value for this. That means whenever you try to declare a variable which have been mentioned as any data type, that means it will take any type of value for this particular variable. Whereas we have just seen that when you are trying to mention some kind of things, or if you are not mentioning as well, here this data 3, if you're trying to define it, and it will throw you another saying that you have declared as a string, but you are trying to define a number data type over here. Okay, but in this case, whenever you try to mention it as an any, it will basically accept all the type of data type that you can define over here. Any is also known as special data type because whenever you try to declare a variable as any, this becomes similar to a data type that we define it. This becomes similar to the code that we have in JavaScript. This becomes similar to the things that we have in JavaScript. What is meant by that? That means you can see this we have defined as a string over here, but you are free to define the number as well. In the next line, you can also define a boolean of variable as well. Boolean data type as well. You can define null as well, and then you can also define undefined value as well. So it's similar to a JavaScript code when you are trying to define inside a TypeScript by using any. Now, where can you use any as a data type? So whenever you try to migrate your code from JavaScript to TypeScript, you can define it as an any data type. Whenever you try to migrate your code from JavaScript to TypeScript, you can define any as a data type so that any type of value that you have defined inside a JavaScript will be acceptable over here and will be considered as a valid code in TypeScript. Okay. Now, till now, if you see, we have seen every type of data type that we have discussed over here is basically accept only one type of value. Basically accept only one type of value. That means a number over here, string over here, Boolean over here, any other things over here, except the any, which accepts all the type of things. The next data type that we have is union over here. A union says that you can define more than one data type of a variable as well. You can define more than one data type of a variable as well. Now, what is meant by that? That means you can also define a variable which can accept either a number or a let's say a string. You can also define a variable which can accept, let's say, something which is string or Boolean value as well. Okay, so union allows a variable to hold multiple data types. Union basically allows a variable to hold multiple data types, which is not similar to any. Any will accept any type of data type. Any will accept any type of data type. This union will hold a multiple data type. Multiple data type means it can accept a number, it can also accept at the same time, it can also accept a string value as well. So how do we define a union data type? Union data type will basically be defined like this by using a pipe symbol. That means either number, this pipe symbol represents or. That means either number or string. Okay. So in the next line, if you try to define a string over here, this will not throw us an error. But if you try to define, let's say, data 7 equals to true, then it will throw us an error because it says that this data 7 is available to accept only two types of data type. One is number, another is string. But you are trying to define a Boolean which is not assignable to a type, string or number. And that's where it will throw us an error saying that you are trying to define a data type which is not a part of this. But if you are trying to allow this, then you can also mention something over here which is Boolean. And this at this point of time, this will be allowed. So whenever you try to define all the type of data type, which is also null and undefined as well, at this point of time, this will be similar to any data type. That means it will accept any type of data type that you can define over here. But whenever you have to define like this kind of things, you can directly go for any. Union is meant to define a multiple data type. That means a variable can accept more than one data type of more than one data type of the values. You have to, when you do not know, like any, you can also use at when you do not know that the data that you are trying to get from anywhere, either a file or an API, when you do not know that what kind of data type the variable, the value will be fetched from the API or somewhere else, at that point of time we can go for any. That means that will accept any type of value that it will return us. And if you know that there can be either a number or a string data type, there you can define like this, which is union data type over here. apart from a number or a string, if there will be any value, then it will throw us an error. Okay, so these are basically primitive data type that we have in both JavaScript and TypeScript. Non-primitive data type we'll see in the later part of our TypeScript, where we'll discuss regarding array, objects, and functions. Okay, so that's about the data type that we have in TypeScript. Let's go over to you people to see if you have any questions over here. You can see the Q&A part. And then I'll come to you people. You can also raise your hand, whoever wants to get unmuted over here. Okay, so you have mentioned JS does not allow data type. Then why we have a common data? Okay, so JavaScript basically does not allow us to specifically or explicitly mention the data type. Okay, there is no difference. There is nothing common things that like why we have both JavaScript and TypeScript common data type. So JavaScript does not allow us to explicitly declare the data type. The data type will be available inside any of the programming languages. JavaScript does not allow us to explicitly mention the data type of a variable. That will not allow explicitly not allow us to explicitly mention the data type of the variable, whereas TypeScript will allow us. We are not printing the variable itself in the Boolean data type, but the condition is it. So here, right, we were trying to just check the condition. In terms of this, if we talk about, we were just trying to check a condition. What you can do is you can define a variable saying that, let's say, bool equals to let's say 10 greater than 50, and whatever the value that you'll receive over here, you can simply print this value over here as well. This will be similar to without like writing in a 2 lines of code. I was just trying to write inside a single value itself. Okay, so this will give a Boolean value, either true or false. So in the TypeScript, we cannot define a variable names like any number. In the TypeScript, we can define. In the TypeScript, we have to it is not mandatory, but we can define. In JavaScript, we cannot define like that. So if you want to make it as, let's say, a string, you cannot do that in JavaScript. What it says is, it says that type annotation can only be used in TypeScript file. Okay, but in terms of a TypeScript, as we have seen over here, that you can define like data type over here, you can define a data type over here. Let's say string, you can mention it over here as a data type. You have mentioned a number as a data type. We have mentioned a null as a data type, a string as a data type, undefined as a data type, and so on. Okay, you can also mention a null over here. You can also mention an undefined over here as well. Okay, so in the TypeScript, so in TypeScript, we can define a variable name like any number, etc. Do we have any notes for these topics similar to what you are writing while taking the class with definitions and examples? So these are very basic things that we go in terms of a data types, but yes, you should be able to see it inside the document that you by now you should have gotten the access of. So inside this document, you should be able to see the different data types that we have in terms of TypeScript. So I've given like Y TypeScript as well, and then you can see the data type as well will be defined over here. So TypeScript data type. So different types of data type that I have given over here, which is like primitive data type, non-primitive data type, type inference that I was talking about earlier, type annotations, every example along with the example I have given. For union data type, OR is accepted. Similar can we use and? No, we cannot use and because one value will not have a different data type. One value will always have a single data type itself. So you can use only or, either a number or a string. A single value will never be having two different data types. It accepts one data at a time only, but can accept different data types for the same variable. For the same variable, it can accept different data types. Yes. Can you explain the use of any data type again apart from JavaScript or TypeScript migration? I've given you the example when you do not know that what kind of value that you are trying to get from an API, right? At that point of time, you can use any as a data type. Right. So I'll do this after our class. First,
Praveen sir, I've created a feature branch so that should I publish that branch? No, right? Or I can still be able to pull your changes into my local.
you have to move to the master branch, and then from there you can pull.
I can pull, right? Okay, I can do that. Yeah. Thank you.
I did not print the isAdmin variable that you have defined as boolean. How that is connected to bool value, that I could not understand. Right. So here I have just defined, like, how do you define a variable over here? I have just defined the value. If you want to print it, you can print like isAdmin over here, and this will give you the value as true, whatever the value that you have defined over. So this will give you a true value. I was just trying to define, like, how do we define the boolean data type. Okay, and that is why I did not print. But if you print this, then whatever the value that you have given over here will display. It is similar to this one, right? So let bool equals to 10 is greater than 50. We know that this 10 is not greater than 50. That means this is a false statement. So it will return us a false value, and that value we are trying to print over here as this. So this is similar one. We have just assigned a value which is true. If you try to print isAdmin, will give you the whatever the value that you have defined over here. How to give backtick symbol? So backtick symbol, I believe, like I have just answered, that backtick symbol you will be able to see just above your tab keyword on your keyboard, or just below the escape keyword on your keyboard. How will you identify the data type of the code written in TypeScript type annotation to be migrated? Any explain? So in JavaScript, how will it identify the data type for the code written in TypeScript type annotation? Right. So whenever you write any TypeScript file, right? So and also, like, what happens is when you try to write a TypeScript file will get compiled to a JavaScript file, right? So TypeScript file will ultimately get compiled to a JavaScript file. How does the compilation happen? The compilation happen will that whatever the type annotation that you have declared will be removed inside the JavaScript. Let me show you one example of it. So in this case, we have defined a data types dot TypeScript. Right? Let me delete this data type dot JS and compile this particular file. How do we compile a TypeScript file? Can anyone answer? How do we compile a TypeScript file?
TSC file name dot.
Right. So TSC stands for TypeScript compilation, which will compile our file. So TSC space TypeScript, so data types dot TS. Right? So if you see over here, we do not have any JS file. This will compile our TypeScript code into a JavaScript file, JavaScript code. And if you see inside this, we have given a lot of places that a data type, which is number over here for data 2, a single quote we have given string data type, and so on. Right? If you see in this case, exactly similar things will be defined, but without having any kind of data type over here. So it has automatically removed the type that we have had defined at the time of describing the variable inside a TypeScript. It has removed all the type of data type that we have defined over here in TypeScript. You can see it has removed any, it has removed union, and everything it has been removed from here, and then it has compiled the TypeScript code into a JavaScript. Okay, and that is how you will be basically able to migrate from TypeScript to JavaScript. In terms of a JavaScript, we know that whenever you try to define a value, that will basically do not have any kind of data type. So if you do not know what is the data type of a variable, it's always better to provide any as a data type. In calling a variable inside string using template literal, variable data type can either any type of data type can it be. It can be a number, it can be a string, it can be Boolean, or any other data type. It can also be available over here. So I'll just define it as, let's say, a name1 over here, which I'll just give as name1, and then I'll make it as, let's say, John. And then I'll define it as, let's say, I'll not, and I'll just define it as, okay, let me not disturb this code, and let's print it over to another one, which I'll define it as, let name1 equals to John, and then I'll say it as greet1 equals to welcome, and then the variable that you have defined over here. Okay, so when you print this particular things, this will print as a value which is welcome John over here. So whatever the value that you have defined, so any kind of data type that you can define over here. Can you please share the GitHub link once again? In real time, which data type frequently used? So in real time, most of the time, probably you will not be using a data type. But even though if you're required to use that, then you will be using the specific data that you are trying to declare, whether a number, string, Boolean, or any of the things. Everywhere we have used a let keyword. So where we'll be using var or const keyword. So var will not be using in terms of modern JavaScript and TypeScript. Const will be using whenever we try to define a constant variable. If you have explained, maybe I have missed. Yes, I believe like you have to go through with the previous sessions, like just previous session, like yesterday's session, and you'll understand what happened in terms of var, let, and const. So you can go to the variables.ts, and there you'll understand when can we use var, let, and const. So var, whenever you try to declare, var basically will not be using. Let, whenever you try to declare a variable which can change at later point of time, is there you have to use a keyword known as let. Const is something where you have to define a constant variable. So whenever you think that you are trying to define a constant variable, at that point of time, you can use a const keyword. Okay. Now, anyone of you, if you are trying to ask any kind of questions, feel free to ask over here. Type of questions if you have related to the session or previous sessions.
Yeah.
Can you share the GitHub link?
GitHub link, I'll share it.
Yeah, right.
I think I've already shared in our chat, in our group, but I'll share it again. So great, it is. I'll add that. Meanwhile, you can ask any questions if you have. So this is the GitHub that we have over here. I'm also trying to paste it inside the chat. You can get it from here as well. I'll do inside our group as well. Okay, great. Any other question for now? If anyone of you have any?